2022 was definitely a year for animation. What with companies like Warner Brothers and Netflix no longer hiding their complete and utter contempt for not just animation, but for film and television as an art form. Not only have these corporations been canceling countless projects left and right, regardless of their success, but in some cases they've been straight up destroying near-finished shows and movies, all just to save a quick buck. With the current state of the entertainment industry at large, it's hard to be optimistic about any show having any sort of future beyond 2 seasons. That said, despite how bleak things are looking in the animation front, this hasn't prevented 2022 from giving us quite a few cartoons worth talking about. Which is why I want to take the time to highlight and rank all 10 of the cartoons I followed this past year. Yeah, it's not a lot, but it's a nice round number that'll hopefully appease the YouTube algorithm gods. Oh, who am I kidding? There's no appeasing this hellscape of a website. Wait, am I even allowed to say hell anymore? Damn it! Of course, due to the nature of this list, there will be quite a few shows that I won't be talking about. And I'm just going to rip the band-aid off now. That includes Slippin' Jimmy. Aww. I know, it's all everyone's been talking about this past year, but apparently you have to watch these 2 other shows first to understand the lore, and I just could not find the time. With that out of the way, here are my top 10 cartoons of 2022.
Disappointment in the game of life!
Okay, I actually feel bad about this one, especially considering that this is the only show on this list that I didn't quite care for. I really wanted to like being PuppyCat Lazy in Space. I remember liking the web series, the trailers made it look really promising, and it's clear that there was a ton of love and care put into this show. But man, it just did not do it for me. I actually wanted to make a full video discussing the show a few months back, but I ultimately scrapped it for 2 reasons. One, my amphibia hyperfixation took over and possessed me to talk about the greatness that is Marcy Wu, and 2, I just did not feel strongly enough about this show one way or another to go through with finishing it. B and PuppyCat follows B, a recently unemployed 20-something, and PuppyCat, her newly adopted pet/roommate dog-cat hybrid with a mysterious past, as they perform temp jobs across the galaxy in order to pay rent. Now admittedly there is plenty of stuff to like here. I love the anime-esque art style, the animation's pretty good, the pastel color palette is very appealing, and the show has this chill, laid-back atmosphere that I really dig. Unfortunately, while visually and aesthetically pleasing, there are serious issues I take with its writing. Most notably, the pacing. Oh dear god, the pacing just kills B and PuppyCat Lazy in Space for me. I don't know why they felt the need to make the episodes 22 minutes long, because it's very clear that going from the 6 to 10 minute format of the web series to this was a serious adjustment for the staff. B and PuppyCat seriously struggles to fill out its runtime, with the episode's plots often meandering to the point where I get bored and mentally check out, just waiting for the episode to end already. Like, the pacing is so slow that after a while, it genuinely became hard for me to pay attention to what was going on screen, which I don't think has ever happened to me when watching a show. The pacing problems also extend to its overarching story, which is super unfocused. B and PuppyCat feels like it simultaneously wants to be a chill slice of life show with the lore being secondary, like say Summer Camp Island, but also tell this large scope story with serious stakes like Steven Universe, leaving the show to feel pretty disjointed, to the point where it sometimes feels like B and PuppyCat doesn't quite know what it wants to be. For instance, PuppyCat's identity as the space outlaw seems like it'd be a reveal the show would build up to over time, only to straight up tell us this in the very first episode, then do nothing with this information until halfway through the season. I don't know, I just think that's a really weird way to handle things. There are also quite a few plot elements that are just kind of there and aren't really elaborated on. Like, there's a later episode that just casually drops that B formerly dated and lived with one of Decker's brothers, whose name I honestly don't care enough to remember, and spends the entire episode doing a temp job with him, but the episode itself does nothing to elaborate on their relationship, and the fact that their exes is so underplayed that I genuinely had no idea this was supposed to be their dynamic. B being exes with this character doesn't quite feel like an aside, but it also doesn't really feel important. Again, it's weird. Some of these plots are handled in such a strange way that I'm sometimes not sure what I'm meant to take away from them. Again, things just kind of happen on this show. Not helping matters is that the characters themselves aren't super interesting. While PuppyCat is a wonderful little gremlin, and some of the supporting characters like Cardamon and Cass, the latter of whom is literally just needed from OK JKO, are pretty cool. Everyone else is just kind of whatever. While I think Bee and PuppyCat have a really sweet dynamic, Bee herself is kind of a blah character when she doesn't have PuppyCat to play off of. Decker, despite his struggles with culinary school being very relatable, doesn't get enough focus to feel like a fully realized character. There are also these warlock dudes who act as the show's main villains, and they're some of the most non-threatening, forgettable, nothing cartoon villains that I've seen in quite some time. The rest of the cast is just kind of fine. They're pretty one note, but serviceable enough, I guess. It's really a shame that being PuppyCat Lazy in Space didn't really click with me. I can see why people would really love it, and there's definitely a great show in there somewhere. Give it another season or two, and I think the show would be able to work out its kinks and become something really stellar. But given that it's a Netflix animated series not named Big Mouth, I'm not exactly holding my breath. As is though, while far from being bad, and not without its charm, Bee and PuppyCat ended up being pretty meh for me.
They're babies!
This was the only Cartoon Network original released in 2022. That isn't an indictment against this show, but yeesh. Anyway, when We Baby Bears was first announced, I was kind of confused since We Bare Bears already had numerous episodes focusing on the bears as babies, so I didn't really understand what the point was of making an entire show based off that premise. Fortunately, it manages to maintain a distinct identity of its own, as in contrast to the original show's relatively grounded, slice-of-life tone, We Baby Bears is a fantastical show where the bros travel to different dimensions, portrayed in a cute anime art style. Now admittedly, this spin-off doesn't quite have the same level of charm and humor as We Bare Bears, but it's still a pretty fun time regardless. Little Grizz, Panda, and Ice Bear are every bit as adorable and charming as they were in the original show. And the show's supporting cast, while not as strong as the originals, are still likable as is. The premise of the bears traveling to different universes also lends itself well to quite a few varied fun settings and scenarios. There's even a crossover episode with Summer Camp Island of all things. Super underrated show, by the way. I really need to give it a rewatch before the final Oh wait, I can't. Because David Zaslav is the devil. And yes, this bit was entirely shoehorned in so I could express my disdain for this awful, awful man. With that said, while it's a decently fun time and has a great art style, We Baby Bears is one of those shows where what you see is what you get. A cute anime-esque spin-off of We Bare Bears that does a good job in achieving what it wanted to do. It's nothing too special, and I honestly don't have a lot to say about it, but it's still enjoyable enough, and worth at least checking out if you're a fan of the original series.
Welcome, gamers!
In contrast to what the creator of The Last of Us show may say, I really feel like we've reached a point where good film and television adaptations of video games have become more the norm. The aforementioned The Last of Us show is getting a lot of buzz. Illumination of all studios might be giving us the greatest video game film of all time in Super Mario Bros. Arcane and Cyberpunk Edgerunner successfully gaslit people into thinking the games they were based on were actually good. And last year gave us two pretty good video game cartoons. The Cuphead show, based off the hit indie game of the same name, and Sonic Prime, the Blue Blur's latest animated outing. Starting with the Cuphead show, it follows the misadventures of Cuphead and Mugman, who get into all sorts of mischief across the Inkwell Isle, while avoiding the devil, who's hell-bent on getting the former soul. Now admittedly, the Cuphead show isn't always consistent. Some episodes can feel a bit unfocused, and there are times when Cuphead's impulsiveness can come across as more grating than charming. But when the Cuphead show works, it works really well. The Cuphead show's cast of characters are absolutely delightful. The series does a wonderful job of giving these already lively characters even more personality. Cuphead and Mugman work off of each other pretty well, with Cuphead being the reckless idiot to Mugman's cautious worrywart, and the devil is nothing shy of hilariously evil. Out of all the characters though, Miss Chalice is probably the highlight of the show for me. They took this character who in the game honestly didn't have a whole lot going on beyond having a cute design, and turned her into this absolutely charming, smooth-talking con artist. An unexpected direction to take the character for sure, but still a really fun one. In fact, all of the supporting characters, especially the bosses, are super fun. Some of my favorites include Henchman, who goes from being one of the devil's attacks in his boss fight, to his bumbling yet actually pretty competent sidekick, Cal Maria, who's just Russian for some reason, and Baroness von Bonbon, who's an absolute lunatic and I love her. These fun characters are only elevated by the stellar voice cast, all of whom give great performances that truly bring these characters to life.
You know what I do when I'm not so sure? I double down! What does that even mean?
I just wish we got to see more of the game's bosses in this show, and that the ones that we did get got a bit more screen time. Seriously, it's nothing short of a crime that King Dice, the gamest in the land himself, is only in 4 episodes. There were plans to include more bosses in future episodes, but of course Netflix canceled the show before that could happen. Because unless you're Stranger Things, the previously mentioned Big Mouth, or exploitative schlock that makes a spectacle of the atrocities of a real-life serial killer, Netflix hates you. Just like the game it's based on, the Cuphead show is influenced by classic rubber hose cartoons of the 30s, with episodes consisting of simple but entertaining stories that tend to emphasize on slapstick humor, as well as just general silliness. Weirdly enough though, the show does have some bits of serialization, which is a bit odd given the Cuphead show's tone. While I'm usually down for continuity and otherwise episodic cartoons, I don't think these serialized elements are particularly interesting, nor do they really fit the tone of the show well. At least not until the final third of the show, mainly because it involves the greatness that is Miss Chalice. The rig-based animation is fluid and the characters are plenty expressive. While it's definitely different from the hand-drawn style of the game, I think that this style of animation complements the zany, fast-paced tone better than it would if it were done frame by frame. I also love how the show goes the extra mile of emulating the feel of 30s cartoons, by doing things like adding film grain, and occasionally integrating model backgrounds similar to what you'd see in the Fletcher Popeye cartoons. It's great stuff. Sonic Prime, meanwhile, follows Sonic, who after destroying an artifact known as the Paradox Prism while fighting Eggman, ends up splitting his world into 5 alternate universes, or shadow spaces, leaving Sonic to travel across different dimensions, and collect the 5 pieces of the Paradox Prism in hopes of fixing his mistake. Right away, I have to say that visually the show's great. Sonic Prime is the most animated and expressive Sonic and Friends have been in quite some time. The animation especially shines during its sick action sequences. The action sequences in Sonic Prime are super slick and have great fight choreography. The show manages to perfectly capture the exciting, fast-paced kinetic energy of the games, more so than any of Sonic's previous shows. As great as the animation is, it's very clear that there are areas where corners were cut. Apart from the dystopian universe that serves as the main setting, the shadow spaces introduced so far aren't visually or conceptually interesting. Most of the show's environments also feel barren, being completely devoid of incidentals and having Sonic and his friends being the sole inhabitants of each location. It makes me wish that Sonic Prime had a larger cast of characters to work with. If not other characters from the games, then at least give us some OCs. The closest we get to one is this Blaze the Cat looking incidental, voiced by a streamer that I'm not familiar with who's just kind of there for a single episode. Just look at her, thinking she's an actual character. There's also this one big character in the Pirate universe voiced by, wait, Jacksepticeye? Huh. Speaking of characters, the cast is all around pretty good. All of the characters are in line with their canon counterparts, with the exception of Sonic, who's more impulsive, hyperactive, and even a bit insensitive at times. He kinda feels like a combination of movie Sonic and OVA Sonic. Despite being a bit of a different take on him, Sonic Prime still captures the spirit of Sonic's character well, with the writing portraying him as more endearing than annoying, and always having his heart of gold shine through. I'd also like to give a special mention to the show's depiction of Shadow. This is literally the best written he's been in the past decade, solely because the show actually gives Shadow a valid reason to act antagonistic towards Sonic, rather than writing him as the most insufferable jerk-ass edgelord this side of Sasuke Uchiha like in Sonic IDW. Seriously, Sega, ease up on your dumb mandates on Shadow. Ian and Evan know how to write these characters, just let them cook. While the shadow spaces themselves are pretty generic locations, the different versions of Sonic's friends that inhabit them are pretty entertaining and memorable, with the standouts very easily being Nine, a version of Tails who, due to never having a friend like Sonic, ended up becoming a cynical loner, and Rusty Rose, a cold, calculating, roboticized Amy. The only characters who don't really do it for me are the Chaos Council, a group of 5 alternate Eggmans, people, whatever, who serve as the main villains. For a group who rule over a dystopian future, they really aren't very threatening, nor are they particularly entertaining or interesting. What I wouldn't give for Sonic's at AM Robotnik. You could never be him. The writing has the tone of a Saturday morning cartoon, which is fitting enough for the premise and is pretty solid overall, but the constant flashbacks kind of screws with the flow and pacing of the story. The voice cast is also nothing short of stellar, being among the best ones we've had in Sonic. All of the actors capture the characters' personalities well, and do a great job of pulling off both comedic and dramatic scenes. Like, I did not expect the voice of Rainbow Dash to fit Tails as well as it does.
don't you think it was weird that Eggman wasn't in the Egg Crusher?
Not really. I mean, he is a total chicken.
That said, despite enjoying Sonic Prime, there is literally no way that this is canon to the games. I don't care what Sega says, you can't expect me to believe that this Sonic, who has to have an entire arc where he learns to appreciate his friends and realize he's been taking them for granted, is the same one who's practically Mr. Power of Friendship in games like Heroes and Forces. It's almost as if the Everything's Canon claim wasn't very well thought out on Sega's part. Admittedly, I put these two shows on the same spot, partially because it would be thematically fitting, but I really do like both of these shows roughly the same. Although the Cuphead show reaches higher highs and lower lows, Sonic Prime is overall more consistent. Either way, both of these shows are pretty good adaptations, and are worth checking out, especially if you're a fan of the games they're based on.
No! Proud!
Growing up, the Proud Family was always one of my favorite Disney Channel cartoons. It was a clever, funny, heartfelt show that was capable of being hilariously absurd, while also tackling pretty serious topics with a good deal of tact. When it was first announced that the Proud Family was getting a revival on Disney+, I was a little bit skeptical, given that the press release detailed that at one point it'd be tackling cancel culture, leading me to fear that the show would end up trying too hard to be relevant and end up coming across as out of touch. However, the minute I started watching Louder and Prouder, I realized that my fears were totally unfounded. Watching the Proud Family Louder and Prouder for the first time was like meeting with an old friend you hadn't seen in years. Sure, they may look a bit different from how you remember them, but they're still very much the same person you grew up with. It really does feel like the Proud Family never really left. The humor's still sharp, the characters' conflicts are still relatable, Penny's still a well-written, believable teenager, Oscar's still a laugh riot, and Penny's friends are still awful. Except for Michael. He was always one of the real ones, and it's cool that he's a main character now. The Proud Family Louder and Prouder also tackles even more serious issues than the original series did. While there are a few episodes that kind of drop the ball when handling these kinds of issues, more often than not, the series approaches these topics with the same level of delicacy and nuance it always did. Said topics include, but aren't limited to, homophobia, slavery, and white fragility. I'm genuinely surprised that the mouse let them get away with this, but hey, I'm not complaining. Unlike other people who are mad at the show for saying that slavery was a thing and that's bad. My god, I'm so fucking tired. Ignoring my waning faith in humanity for a second, as familiar as Louder and Prouder feels, there are some changes from the original series, mainly the visuals. Along with the updated character designs, the revival uses rig-based animation, resulting in more fluid, snappier movement. The revival as a whole is more visually striking than the original Proud Family, while it's still feeling familiar and faithful to it. There are also some new additions to the cast, all of whom fit into the show really well. I especially like Penny's new boyfriend, Kareem. They're just absolutely adorable together. All of that said, there are a few minor gripes that I have with the show, like how it'll occasionally flash back to scenes from the original Proud Family. Not only are these moments super jarring, considering how different the original and revival look from each other, but they're totally superfluous, and only really amount to the show saying, hey, remember this scene from the Proud Family? Also, while the remixed theme song is nice enough on its own, it simply doesn't stack up to the iconic original one. But again, those are just nitpicks. The Proud Family Louder and Prouder is every bit as funny, charming, and thoughtful as the original series, and it's definitely a must-watch for anyone who grew up with it. Which is why I'm so happy it's being dragged into white people's culture war bullcrap. My people will never be free.
You wanna be big?
Personally, I never grew up with the Big Nate comics. Prior to the show, my experience with Big Nate was limited to that one island in Pop Tropica, which is still operating after 15 years, holy crap. And that one strip where Nate builds the Twin Towers out of sand that occasionally makes the rounds on Twitter. Yet, despite my lack of familiarity with the property, everything about the Big Nate cartoon just feels so nostalgic to me. Following the day-to-day life of mischievous middle schooler Nate Wright, who aspires to become a legend within his school, Big Nate feels like it was pulled straight out of the 2000s, and I mean that in the best possible way. For instance, this is an episodic slice-of-life cartoon that has a 22-minute format, which while more common in the 90s and 2000s, in this day and age, that's completely unheard of. It's honestly really refreshing to see a show like this be given the time to let their stories and characters breathe. Said characters, while not anything you haven't seen before in other shows, are still plenty charming and fun in their own right. Dee Dee's probably the character I ended up gravitating the most towards. She's just so extra in the best possible way. Also, she's gay, and that's pretty neat. As much as I enjoy the more optimistic, positive tone that's become more prevalent in modern cartoons, I appreciate that Big Nate has a cynical edge to it, which was again more common in the 2000s. Stuff like the school being run down to an utterly comical degree, and Nate's dad being an unemployable disaster of a human being is really funny to me. At the same time, the show knows not to get too cynical. It still has a genuine heart to it, and it's clear that these characters really do care about each other. Big Nate is also really funny. I love how unapologetically chaotic, absurd, and occasionally morbid the show's sense of humor is. That being said, despite really liking the 2000s vibes this show radiates, there are a few tropes of that era present here that I personally don't care for. Like the occasional bits of gross out humor, or the main character having a one-sided crush on the shallow popular girl. I'm sorry, but that's a trope I always found grating, and it isn't any better here. Thankfully, those tropes are just an occasional annoyance, and aren't nearly prominent enough to really impact my enjoyment of the show. Visually, Big Nate looks great, especially for television budget CGI. The stylized CG and low frame rate gives the show this really neat stop motion look to it. One detail I really love is how the show stylizes wind and smoke to look like cotton balls. It's a charming visual touch that adds to its stop motion look. This, alongside the use of 2D visual effects, clip art, and surprisingly good lighting, gives Big Nate a stylish, distinct look that makes it a delight to watch. It really sucks how people barely talk about this show online because it's a really good time. I can only imagine it's because no one really cares about Paramount Plus, and only get it for either the iCarly sequel series or to rewatch 90s and 2000s Nicktoons. Regardless, Big Nate is a pretty cool show that's more than worth a subscription to that mediocre streaming service. Huh, I actually showed enough restraint to not talk about the state of the entertainment industry this segment. I'm proud of myself.
Smile, smile, smile.
YouTubers have had a rough transition into film and television. More often than not, online creators simply aren't prepared for the shift from short-form web content to lengthier, bigger budget projects, and end up ultimately failing, which we already saw to some extent with being PuppyCat Lazy in Space. That is, until Smiling Friends. Created by well-known animator and YouTube personality Zach Hadel, better known as Psychic Pebbles, Smiling Friends follows Pim, an eternal optimist, and Charlie, a laid-back cynic, as they get into all sorts of zany situations while working for the titular Smiling Friends agency, a business devoted to making people smile. Right away, the premise is so much fun and leads to a ton of very creative scenarios, ranging from attempting to rehabilitate the career of a celebrity to going on a magical quest to aid a princess. It would have been so easy for this show to take this premise and make it needlessly cynical and edgy, but Smiling Friends actually has a decently optimistic tone to it, with Pim and Charlie typically succeeding in their attempts at cheering people up, which is always a nice sight. At the same time, Smiling Friends has the same manic, unhinged energy of a Newgrounds animation, minus the racism. A little surprising since Chris O'Neill is a part of this show, but I digress. The humor is absolute nonsense, but in the best possible way. Seriously, the Renaissance Men bit is peak comedy. Just to give a good idea as to what kind of show this is, the pilot episode is about a clinically depressed Mike from Red Letter Media, who spends an entire episode pointing a giant revolver at his head, but managing to turn his life around in the end by finding his calling and killing these weird little pests. That is simultaneously heartwarming, darkly funny, and absolutely ridiculous. Which accurately sums up Smiling Friends as a whole. Charlie and Pim play off of each other really well, with their respective voice actors having great chemistry that leads to plenty of funny yet believable interactions. As for the supporting characters, while they're decently enjoyable, I feel like they're pretty underutilized overall. The show also has a really distinct, appealing look to it. The character designs, while mostly simplistic, are still plenty fun and memorable. The animation's also well done, and there's plenty of good character acting in there. Smiling Friends also utilizes different mediums, such as CGI, stop motion, rotoscope, and even live action. It all effectively adds to the completely buck wild look of the show, which is more than appropriate considering its unhinged tone. As a whole, Smiling Friends is a super funny, creative show. It fully deserves the attention it gets, and there's little doubt in my mind that it's going to be remembered as one of Adult Swim's all-time greats.
Gay!
Despite not being number 1 on the list, Dead End might be the show that I ended up having the most fun watching. Based off the comic Dead Endia, which is honestly kind of a cooler name in my opinion, Dead End Paranormal Park centers on 2 teenagers, Barney and Norma, who are new employees at Phoenix Parks, as they keep the supernatural forces that reside within it at bay, while dealing with their own personal struggles and insecurities. Right away, I have to say that the lead characters are absolutely stellar. While there are more than a few cartoons for kids and young adults that have LGBT and autistic representation, there are few I've seen that handled it as well as in Dead End. The show makes it very clear from the get-go that Barney is a gay trans boy, and Norma is an autistic Pakistani girl. Also, Dead End doesn't dance around the fact that there are distinct struggles these two go through, because they're trans and autistic respectively. To see this level of bluntness and honesty on display when it comes to representation is really refreshing. Now that I think about it, this might be the first kid/young adult cartoon that I've seen explicitly use the word trans. What makes Barney and Norma truly great representation is that their personal struggles by and large don't stem from them not being accepted or getting mistreated. Dead End's able to capture the hardships that come with being LGBT and autistic without having said characters be discriminated against, and it leads to some really interesting conflicts. Let's take the reason why Barney runs away from home and lives in Phoenix Parks. While some shows with the trans lead would have this be because the character's parents were abusive or didn't accept their identity, Barney's parents actually do accept that he's trans and love him. The problem Barney has with them is that they're too afraid and unwilling to protect him from his grandmother, who verbally abuses him whenever she comes over. Yes, they accept Barney for who he is, but as the show points out, accepting your child is the bare minimum expected from a parent, and it doesn't mean jack if they're unwilling to give him the support and protection that he needs. That's a super interesting angle to take this kind of narrative, and I can only imagine that there are trans audiences who appreciate portraying this kind of familial conflict without making the parents into straight up abusive monsters. Meanwhile, the actual transphobic abusive monster in Barney's life, while heavily mentioned, is barely seen, and we don't hear what she specifically says to him, which was clearly a deliberate decision. We don't need to see Barney get verbally assaulted by his grandmother to understand how she's been hurting him. The conflict here feels real without coming across as exploitative. Norma, meanwhile, is one of the most well-written autistic characters out there. She's blunt, awkward, anxious, loves info dumping. She's just like me for real. Best of all is that none of the characters treat Norma differently for being autistic, nor does the show criticize her for her difficulty with people. My autistic heart loves it. I'd also like to give a mention to the 3rd episode, Trust Me, which focuses on Norma's social anxiety, and my god, I honestly can't think of a piece of media that quite captures the never-ending stress that comes with simply being around people, and the way that she believes everyone's judging her when she thinks she says or does something wrong. I felt that. It's seriously been a hot second since I've seen myself in a character like I have Norma. Another thing that I love about Barney and Norma is that their identities aren't what solely define them. They both have plenty of stuff going on that isn't strictly related to them being trans or autistic. Barney's sociable, but is super awkward around the guy he likes, and he's athletic with a passion for wrestling. Norma's passionate about all things supernatural, and despite her social anxiety, manages to forge a really close friendship with one of her co-workers, Badia. God, I just love these two so much. Now, while the conversation surrounding Dead End Paranormal Park tends to center on how inclusive it is, and understandably so, beyond the great diversity, Dead End is just a really fun horror comedy. The humor and dialogue is great, and the stories are super creative. I especially like how weird and dark the humor can get at times. Like, this is a show where a character literally breaks out into a Disney princess song about how much she wants to go to hell. Also, Dead End has a musical episode and it's absolutely glorious. Like, holy crap, the songs did not need to go as hard as they did. The rest of the cast is also a ton of fun. Pugsley is the absolute goodest boy you'll ever meet, and his bond with Barney is just so endearing. Just look at him. I love him. On the opposite side of the spectrum, you have Courtney, who's just this chaotic little gremlin with a heart of gold. She's always a joy to watch, and is responsible for some of the show's funniest moments. While they're already really entertaining individually, Pugsley and Courtney are an absolute riot whenever they're paired together. They just have these complete polar opposite energies that contrast each other in such a hilarious way. There's also Badia, who I consider to be one of the highlights of the show, and is perhaps the gayest straight girl to ever live. She's such a positive, upbeat, supportive character, and I absolutely love her relationship with Norma. She just loves that girl so much. Again, not in a gay way, but it doesn't make their friendship any less sweet. Logan, Barney's love interest, is admittedly a bit on the bland side, but he's still likable enough with his unapologetic love for his job. And the relationship between the two is really cute. The villains are also great, with them ranging from delightfully malicious to genuinely creepy to a combination of the two. Now, I have heard some complaints about the art style, but honestly, I don't really get it. While I don't think Dead End stands out that much visually, I think that it looks perfectly fine. The art style is appealing enough, and the animation can be really good at times. Overall, I really like Dead End Paranormal Park. It's an absolute delight that's equal parts hilarious and relatable. And with Season 2's massive cliffhanger ending, I am very much looking forward to seeing just what this show has in store for the future.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer.
Dear God, make it stop. Please, make it stop! There's always a comic. There's always the comic. Anyway, I should probably preface the final two shows on this list by saying that some may not consider them to be cartoons, at least not in the traditional sense. However, the definition of animation is simply creating the illusion that still figures are moving, while the term can apply to frame-by-frame animation, in which a series of drawings are done in order to create the illusion of movement, and CGI, in which a digital model is manipulated. It also applies to what's widely agreed upon to be the earliest form of animation, puppetry. This is going exactly where you think it is.
I'm like a puppet on a string!
Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is a black comedy horror series based on the web series of the same name that satirizes children's programming such as Sesame Street. It follows these three guys as they're regularly visited by a variety of zany characters who try to teach them different lessons on how the world works, which always leads to horrific, surreal results. Like I mentioned before, transitioning from web-based content to television is a really difficult task that very rarely works out. You'd think that Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared would struggle to fill out 22 minutes every episode, given that the longest installment of the web series is only 8 minutes long, but my god, the people behind this show pulled it off flawlessly. Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is able to effectively fill out its runtime without feeling dragged out, while still retaining the familiar format of the web show. Each episode starts out not too different from your typical children's edutainment show, but as it progresses, things start to feel more off and weirdly uncomfortable, before culminating in everything going horribly wrong, and the puppet suffering either physically or psychologically. However, the television series has a stronger focus on black comedy and absurdist humor, while the humor of the web series was more weird and off-putting, signaling to the viewer that things aren't quite right before crap really hits the fan. The television show is more deliberately comedic, and it works really well. The show takes the absurdity of the web series and cranks it up to 11, offering humor that's hilariously bizarre and is always able to catch me off guard, which makes it all the more jarring when things inevitably take a turn for the worst. The TV show is also more character-driven, with the guys feeling less like observers and more like their own distinct characters. Yellow Guy's cheerful stupidity, Red Guy's stoicness, and Duck's unrelenting ego all lend themselves well to plenty of fun interactions with both each other and the world around them. Also, in case you're wondering, I am indeed a Red Guy stan.
I mean, just look at me. Look how excited I'm getting.
I relate to him on a spiritual level. Like the original web show, Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared often incorporates different animation styles alongside puppetry, which include 2D animation, CG, and stop motion, all of which look really good. The songs are also every bit as catchy and hilariously odd as they were in the web show. They're always the highlight of each episode, and do a wonderful job of capturing the bizarre and morbid tone of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. What I really love about Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is how it handles foreshadowing. Everything about the setting and tone is so utterly absurd that what seems like a weird throwaway joke actually becomes a crucial plot point in the following episode. It's a clever way of handling foreshadowing that makes watching the show and speculating about the plot even more fun. Like that one bit where the lamp claims that after we die, we're all forced to perform for an omnipotent council. Is that crucial information about the nature of the setting? Or is it just a random non sequitur? Who knows? It's literally impossible to tell. Also, while the tone may be more comedic, the show still delivers the same level of genuine horror that was present in the web series. I know this has been said in countless YouTube videos, but it bears repeating. The true horror of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared doesn't stem from seeing these puppets getting maimed, but the feeling of not knowing what's going on. There's this regular sense that something much bigger and far more sinister is happening in the background, that the world the guys live in is wrong in some way, but it's impossible to quite pin down what's actually happening. happening. This was a prominent element of the web series, but the TV show takes that uncertainty and unease and dials it up to 11. There's also this persistent sense of helplessness that makes the show all the more creepy. Whatever's going on in the world of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, it's made abundantly clear that the three guys are utterly helpless to do anything about it. Whatever sense of freedom or independence they think they have is a total lie. Someone or something is keeping them trapped inside this world, forcing them to sit through these asinine lessons taught by beings who only wish to torment them. And the worst thing is, they don't even know it. The final 2 episodes are the season's highlights because of how they expertly build upon this sense of uncertainty and helplessness, gradually filling the viewer with dread, making you anticipate the moment where everything will go wrong. And it always the conclusions that aren't just terrifying, they're devastating. Even though I'm certain that the majority of people watching this video have seen Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared in its entirety, I'd rather not go into spoilers. All I'll say is that both episodes see the guys come so close to either gaining freedom or getting an answer as to what the crap their nonsensical universe even is, only to have it snatched away from them, and leaving the audience with even more questions than answers. It's absolutely frustrating in the best possible way. Everything about the Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared television show is just brilliant. It takes everything great about the original web series and turns it into something even more clever and engaging, making it the rare series to not just nail the transition from web to television, but to actually surpass its predecessor in quality. With all of that said, Channel 4, please give this show more seasons. I don't know about the state of the entertainment industry in the UK, but my heart cannot take another show getting cancelled too soon. I'm still upset about Dead End, especially not when there are still so many questions that need to be answered. Like, does Grolton make his appointment? The people need to know.
I won!
Out of all the shows on this list, number 1 is the series I've seen get the least amount of talk, which is nothing short of a tragedy because it is truly something special. Honestly, I don't think there's anything I could possibly say that could properly do this show justice. Regardless, I'm going to try my best to explain why a little show called Lost Ollie is the best animated series I watched in 2022. Like I said earlier, I am kind of cheating by putting this on the list, since Lost Ollie is a live-action CG hybrid, but frankly, I don't care. This show is amazing and I want at least a few more people to know about it. Based on the children's book Ollie's Odyssey, Lost Ollie is a 4-episode miniseries about a naive toy rabbit named Ollie, who ends up getting separated from his best friend Billy, leading him to journey alongside the kind toy clown Zozo and the cynical stuffed bear Rosie to reunite with him. Now I know what you're thinking, this sounds an awful lot like Toy Story, which, yes, the core premise is similar, but trust me when I say this, Lost Ollie is a very different beast. For starters, the human character, Billy, is every bit as involved in the plot as the toys, with him searching for Ollie while simultaneously grappling with losing his mother to cancer. Yeah, if Toy Story 3 made you cry, then prepare to have your heart completely torn out and destroyed by Lost Ollie. Lost Ollie is one of those stories where the plot itself is fairly simple and straightforward, but the weight of the emotions hit hard. At its core, the show is about hanging on to the memories of loved ones, with Ollie's memories of Billy being the thing that drives his journey. However, Lost Ollie makes it very clear that there's a difference between cherishing memories and obsessively clinging on to the past. You should always keep the memories of your loved ones near and dear, but when they're gone, you just have to accept that and try to deal with the grief that comes with it. This central theme comes to a head in the second half of the miniseries in such a visceral, heart-wrenching way. I'm not going to go into specifics and spoil what happens, but it involves a character whose inability to move on has long since driven him mad with despair, and serves as a dark foil to Ollie and Billy. And at the end of it all, Ollie and Billy's storylines come together in such a brilliant, unexpected way that always manages to get to me. Again, I don't want to spoil too much, but dear lord, this entire show is such an emotional roller coaster. It usually takes a lot to make me cry, but by the end of Lost Ollie, tears were actually rolling down my face. Like, when I rewatched this show for this video, I thought I'd be more emotionally prepared, but my god, it still destroyed me. The emotional strength of Lost Ollie is only amplified by the powerful score, choice soundtrack, and stellar performances across the entire cast. I have to give a special mention to Jonathan Groff, who manages to give Ollie such a genuine level of childlike innocence and kindness that makes you want to see the little guy succeed even more than you already do.
I think I might have lost my Billy. Maybe you could help me escape so I can find him. Please?
Ollie himself is just such a sweet yet determined character who is an absolute joy to follow. In contrast to the antagonist, whose slow, tragic descent into darkness left them this frightening, thoroughly broken shell of their former self. The character is equal parts loathsome and pitiful, and is only strengthened by their actor's stellar performance. That's not even getting into how well animated the CG toys are, and how they seamlessly blend into the live-action environments. This entire miniseries was such an unexpected surprise. Why haven't I heard more about this? Oh right, it's on Netflix. That explains it. My cynicism of the state of streaming aside, I sincerely implore anyone watching this video who hasn't already to go check out Lost Ollie. The entire series can be finished in 3 hours, and I assure you, you won't regret it. Lost Ollie is a beautiful, captivating show, and is more than worthy of being #1 on this list. And those were my top 10 cartoons of 2022. Again, 2022 was not a great year for the entertainment industry at large, and I have a feeling that it will be a while until things get better. At the same time, it makes it all the more admirable that there are still so many talented people out there, willing to be able to put so much effort into so many amazing projects. So on the off chance that anyone working in the industry is watching, I just want to say, thank you for putting the time into bringing all of these wonderful shows to life. Hell, thanks for putting in so much time into shows that I didn't quite like. I think I speak for every single animation fan when I say that your work and talent is greatly appreciated, and I wish you all a very unionized.